You're tuned into 9 to 5 Work Rebels with your host, Ebony Gale.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gemsincomms series special, brought to you by 9 to 5 Work Rebels podcast and in association with the Hanson Search, award-winning international executive search consultancy. I am your host, Ebony Gale, and I am very excited to have with me today the lovely Caroline Bernard, who is Head of Influence at Respect, which is a charitable membership body or member body organisation. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me. It's wonderful to have you. Now, just as a bit of background, now this whole Gemsincomms series special is all about giving our Black, Asian, ethnic minority, PR and comms professionals their flowers, essentially, because we know that the industry, PR and comms industry, is known for notoriously being majority white at, 92? I think it's actually gone up to 91% white at the moment. But there are a lot of people of colour who are in the industry doing some great things, and you are one of those. So we want to make sure we give you your flowers and say, well done to you, and to obviously highlight you and highlight your experience. So let's start off with you first, telling us about yourself and like what you do. Have you always wanted to work in comms? Like, what attracted you to the industry?
Well, I work as Head of Influence for a second-tier body, as you mentioned. We're a membership organisation, and that covers everything around policy, communications, public affairs, all the external relations stuff, and also a bit of internal communications as well. And I've been doing that kind of work for about 16 years now, various roles in different charities. I didn't also want to work in comms. I began my career working in the private sector many moons ago. I worked for a couple of Marks and Spencer's clothing suppliers. Oh. And I was a product manager by the end of that time, working around, working with M&S buyers, putting things into production, kind of project management, that kind of thing, quite a different kind of world. But I began thinking about changing career in my sort of late 20s, and I went back to college and was studying part-time for my social science degree when M&S got rid of a few suppliers, and we were one of those. So I got made redundant. So I was able to kind of think about changing career then. Yeah. And I went to work for the Department of Health, just as a temp. I was working on briefings for ministers and writing letters that would come in, from private office, and just kind of writing responses to letters. And that got me into kind of, health and social care policy. I was interested in working in that area anyway. I was studying to work in social policy. So I carried on to get my degree and finished that there, and then got a permanent job in the Department of Health. And it went from there, really. I began to do comms a bit later. I did policy for many years and then went into doing comms a little bit later. And then now I combine the two, policy, comms, and also public affairs. So there's 3 areas there that I work across. Oh, so I didn't also want to work in comms, but I knew that I had the skill. I was interested in the areas of my personal life in public affairs and in kind of current affairs and in health and care. My mother worked as a care worker, so I knew about the social care world from her experience of working at the front line. So that was always something I was always aware of. But I certainly knew I had an interest, and I had some skills that I were not really using in the private sector. So I think I was able to kind of use those skills that I had and the kind of natural talents I had much better in this kind of world. So that's why I changed career.
Amazing. And it's interesting that you went from policy into communications. I think that does make sense, because then you're able to translate that information into bite size. I think it's very important to have an understanding of policy. Comms always works so closely with policy anyway. So that seems like quite a nice kind of move in that way. And obviously in the world that you're in, you deal with a lot more public affairs as well, stakeholder engagement. So yeah, absolutely. Full bag from M&S to, full bag of comms mix, I think that's pretty amazing. Really interesting. And how long you said you've been in the industry for? 16 years?
In total, yeah. I worked for, in terms of that, I worked for a small charity called Counselling Care, who are no longer now. They merged with another organisation for 5 years after I left Anchor. So Anchor was where I worked after I left Department of Health. And I was there for 4 years before going to Counselling Care. But I was more junior in those days. And I was working across corporate policy, and Anchor, as you know, a housing provider. They're now Anchor Hanover, quite a large organisation. I was there 4 years doing kind of quite a junior role, sort of policy person there. But I went to Counselling Care to do policy and communication. So that's 16 years ago that I joined that organisation to do policy and comms as a combined role.
Interesting. And you found that you loved do you find that you love comms more than policy? I'm just asking this because I always like comms because I'm like bite-sized information, but you started out in policy, so you might feel differently.
It's funny, I actually did come to enjoy comms more than policy. And I know that there are people who do policy better than I do it, and I do comms better. So I think in terms of my own skills and what I enjoy more, I have kind of veered more towards the communication side of things, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I think I sort of realised what my skill sets were and where I could, grow more. And that really was around communications. That included things like everything from events to the kind of PR stuff, the kind of press office stuff, the writing stuff, all the stuff that I enjoy and I'm good at. It's all really about comms. So that's really why I ended up kind of pushing my energies more.
Absolutely. And it makes sense to me because I feel like policy, well, that's my own hat on. I feel like policy is always, I always found it slightly more boring because it's, for me personally, I used to work with a lot of policy people, but my job was to make it more fun. So I feel like you get to take the fun part out of the policy bit and, kind of, pull it out there to the world. And that's the great bit about the comms mix of the, working with policy.
Absolutely.
Really fascinating stuff. So I want to move into your lived experiences. So a question I ask everybody is all about trying to get an understanding of when you became aware of your ethnicity. Now, for others listening, this may be a weird question, but it really isn't, because whilst we're born in the skin that we're in and we're in our families and we're, comfortable in our families, it's not until sometimes certain instances that make you become sort of, really potent aware of the fact that you are very different. So for me, I always give an example of heading to school. Secondary school is probably the part where it hit me the most. Sort of first year secondary school, going in and hearing about a group who were called the Chelsea Smilers, would get a knife, a razor, or whatever, and would try and like scar you, cut a smile across your face, particularly if you're black or brown. And so that was petrifying to hear, particularly as an 11-year-old going off to school. So that was my first kind of inkling of, oh my gosh, wow, this is quite something. And let's just make sure, I hope I don't run into these people. So that was my kind of opening to it. So what was your one?
Much earlier than that. And I think I would say it was the 1972 Olympic Games, because I was sitting there with my sister. I must have been about, I don't know, 7 or 8, really young at that time. And we were watching all of the countries coming in and picking out all the black countries and cheering them.
Yeah.
So I was very aware that we looked like those people. So it was that. And also probably this similar time would have been the World Cup when Brazil won the World Cup. We supported Brazil because Brazil looked like us, and we didn't support England. So I remember very clearly being very aware through sports of my ethnicity and the fact that those people look like us and that we would support them. So that was probably my first experience of being aware of my ethnicity.
Oh, amazing. Oh, interesting. It's so interesting, the different answers you get from everybody. It's really amazing, actually. And moving into the work side of things. So have you ever felt like race, ethnicity has ever held you back in your career?
I think sometimes it has, and that's probably more in the private sector than in the charitable sector, because I think that there's, similar issues in PR that you get across the whole private sector, working in the spaces I was in, about black people that you saw, that yourself, you often held back a little bit. When you wanted to progress into a role, you felt that you either couldn't go for that role, or if you did go for the role, there would be a reason why you couldn't, have it. And there was also something happening that you felt that they were holding you back, or placing low expectations on you, more or less telling you that you could not do X, Y, or Z. There was a lot of that going on in the private sector in particular. So I would say that in my early career, it did hold me back a lot.
Yeah.
And
you say private sector more than anything. And would you say you've actually experienced or witnessed racism in the workplace? And how was it handled?
Probably myself, it's really hard to pin down because it's always so subtle, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yeah, it's very subtle, very covert. Yeah. So yes.
So I would say yes, probably around the areas I mentioned before where you are held back from progressing. How is it handled? Probably not very well, probably not handled at all, really. I think that it's very hard because you can't name it, because it's very subtle and the proof is hard to find that you've experienced racism. You end up just really not doing anything about it at all. Of course, later in my life, I think now I'm happy to bring these things up. But when I was younger, I didn't feel confident doing that at all, and probably would say nothing.
Yeah. You just feel uncomfortable and not say anything, because not everyone's going to feel comfortable to speak up in that situation. And it also is a question of whose ears is it falling on? Is it
exactly?
Sometimes you feel like you're talking to someone until you're blue in the face and it's not getting through.
Yeah.
And I suppose a question I always like to ask is about whether there's ever been a time that you wish you spoke up, or maybe you did speak up about something, or a time when you've had to, self-advocate or maybe help somebody else.
I think I have quite recently, in recent years, I've done that. Examples I can give you is where you're in a meeting with, a number of white colleagues, you're the only black person in the room, as usual, as we always are.
Yeah.
And everybody else gets to speak and say their whole piece. When you start speaking, you're interrupted constantly. That happened to me in a role recently, and I did take my manager to one side and say, why did you interrupt me but nobody else? And they didn't realise they were doing it. They just apologised profusely for it. And again, it's that very subtle thing. They probably didn't even know they were doing it, but they had maybe subconscious expectations or subconscious, prejudice that made them feel they had to question everything I was saying and interrupt me and not let me finish what I was saying, whereas others were able to say their piece.
So say their piece with flow. Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of thing is where I've spoken up. Recently.
And was it well received? So you said that she was kind of apologetic. But did you see
she did apologise.
Behaviour since that, in meetings?
Yeah, I think they made an effort to do that afterwards. And they were mortified that they had done it. So it wasn't done deliberately.
Yeah.
But this is where we have that situation where things are so deeply ingrained in people's minds and psyches, they do it without even realising they're doing it. And then when you point it out to them, they're usually mortified.
Yeah, absolutely. I had this conversation with somebody else and they said the same thing about sometimes it is a case of pointing it out to them. And then they realise, because obviously, like you said, subconsciously, sometimes they're not aware. But sometimes there is conscious and there is, unconscious bias. And some of them are consciously aware, some of them are not. And in this case, it sounds like she may have not been. But at the same time, it's a case of, yes, you have to check yourself. If you're sitting there questioning only this one person, a black woman who's in the room, she's in a senior position, everybody else around the table has able to give their briefings. And when it's your time, you're constantly, interrupted to the point where you're feeling probably like, if you let me get my words out, you probably would have all the answers to your questions anyway. It's that sort of a dynamic, which is really frustrating, but really good on you that you took her aside and dealt with it as well. And it's these sort of things that people don't understand, that are little nuances. It's not a case of anybody just shouting and screaming at you. Not in the UK. Everything is very covert. Undercover racism, very subtle microaggressions like you experienced. And again, it does come from people's biases. I say this a lot, and the stereotypes, because you watch a TV show, you start to think that this is how people react, and look at the media and how we are usually depicted in the media again. We've come a long way to an extent, absolutely, but still have lots more to go, I'd say. So I wanted to speak to you about code switching. Now, I think it's always interesting when we touch on this topic of code switching. Now, do you feel that we can actually lead with our authentic voices in the workplace? Because, often we code switch. I'll be at home with my family, Caribbean family, might drop into a bit of Jamaican patois, might come back out of it. Won't necessarily do that at work. But I do feel like, for the most part, when I talk to some of my white colleagues or counterparts, they will feel like they can bring themselves to work to a degree. Whereas I feel like, as a black person, I don't ever bring my full self to work. I have different codes that I have to switch into.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. And I think there's something about that we need to try to find a way to get around that. Not that we should all be going to work I think bring your whole self to work is fine. And I think that we should be able to do that. And I think it is a shame that we can't, because of that need to code switch, that we all just do without even thinking about it. But I think with everything that's gone on over the last few years and all the discussions we had about race and ethnicity and diversity inclusion, we need to get to a place where we can bring our whole selves to work. Doesn't mean you speak patois at work all the time, but just that you don't feel you have to hide certain parts of yourself. You can discuss what you've been doing at the weekend. If you've gone to something that is quite underground in terms of your activity, that white colleagues may not understand, may not know about. You should be able to talk about those things, not feel you've got to be saying that you went to the opera or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if you didn't. So I think there's something about us being able to find a way to bring our whole selves to work without fear of, judgment around that. And I think we need to get to that point, but we haven't got there yet.
Definitely not. We haven't. So again, your answer to that is basically you also agree that you don't feel like we can be our full authentic self in the workplace.
No, not yet. We should be able to. We can't.
No. I agree with you, and I do think it also depends on where you work. I think if you're working for sort of government in particular, there's a certain pressure there as well. I've worked with government bodies, and sometimes you feel like you need to assimilate, just to get along essentially without being judged and all that going on. So there's lots of layers in this, and it's very interesting,
Yeah, we've heard many, recent stories about civil servants who've spoken out about their experiences in the workplace. And so we know that government, unfortunately, is not a good place at the moment. I mean, I've worked in Department of Health, and it was not a bad experience for me, but I know for many it has been.
A problem, absolutely, because look at the lady that just took the lawsuit out against them, and she worked for is it MOJ or MOD? MOJ. And what she went through was absolutely disgraceful. But unfortunately, she is not the only one. She is definitely not the only one. So that's the sad thing about it. And the way this government is moving, Tory government, they're quite open to me in their racism. They're very open about that, and very open about gaslighting ethnic minorities essentially at the moment, rather than understanding them. So in the PR and comms in particular, I want to ask you, when did you become aware of the colour bias in PR and comms? Was that once you entered? Because obviously you came from a different industry anyway, then you went policy and then comms. So interesting to get your take.
Yeah, when I began to work in policy and communications for a charity, then I became very aware of the fact that you have policy, PR, comms, public affairs people who generally are all from very similar backgrounds and look very much the same, and I was the odd one out. So that was when I realised that was an issue, and that was when I got involved in my personal volunteering life. Got involved in doing some work with colleagues around it. That's when I was involved with Ignite. You may have heard of Ignite. I was part of that group when it was running. So yeah, I became aware of that about 16 years ago, and I began to work for a charity in policy and communications. And ever since then, I've been very acutely aware. Whenever I interview any kind of role, you will get a whole queue of very nice, young white women applying for those roles. You get the odd man as well, but on the whole, it's generally young white women who go for those roles. And so it's very, very stark.
Yeah, it really is. And I suppose it's really interesting that you say that you start to see that how you came into the industry. Because I was always in-house comms, I was always a person who was obviously the one black person there, or maybe there might be another person in another team somewhere else, but not in comms, and going to cross sectional meetings or government meetings. You'll see young people here and there. But for me, I felt like the stark awareness became, mostly definitely in terms of interviewing. Whenever I had to interview for my team, I was quite surprised at the number of just white people that I would get. There'd be like literally no black people coming through, and mostly women, like you said. And then joining Women in PR was also a massive reminder, because I was like, it's just a sea of white women, literally. And you're looking out for a few people who look like yourself. I know we met at one of them, so I was very happy to see. Yeah. So I feel like there's more women of colour coming to these meetings now.
They are coming through now,
which is great. But it has been, it does kind of make you very acutely aware,
It does. It does. And I think there's something about the pathways as well to those jobs that we don't necessarily know about. Yeah. Most people who get to work in public affairs and comms and PR tend to go through that sort of working for an MP, for example, and then going public affairs for a charity. And often it starts with an internship, which is very low paid or unpaid, and not everyone can afford to do unpaid internships. So the route to getting to those posts is often, for people like us, quite, unless you're very lucky, quite circuitous. And certainly I came for a very non-traditional route to get to this post. So there you are. I think there's that as well. The pathways are not very clear for black people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think that's something that they definitely are trying to work on. Even I put together a document for Hanson Search at the moment, which is about pathways for entry. And I know there's things out there like Taylor Bennett Foundation. They're doing some great work in that. helping to try and
they're great.
improve the pathways. There's an organisation called Creative Access, but they cover all creative industries. But again, that's kind of one. But again, a lot of those ones are not as known to the communities again. You know, you've got that a disconnect once again. So I feel like there's still work to be done around those areas. But,
and certainly the careers teachers don't know about them either.
They definitely do not.
So they're not steering the young people to those areas either. So there's a lot of work to do. You're right.
There is a lot of work to do for careers people, because the stories I've heard from careers people, it's just been quite disgraceful. It's just like, what, because we're black, we can't go anywhere? Is that really what's going on? No. You know, luckily a lot of us have got our own minds and we're like, no, let's keep pushing and keep going. You know, the amount of dreams that some of these career coaches have killed, I'm pretty sure has been huge. So as we're speaking about this and talking about that, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on allyship, you know, and what it means for you, and, you know, an example of good allyship to you. So what are your thoughts around allyship? Because I feel like it's banded around quite a lot within the industry. What does it mean for you?
It is. I mean, I really like the Emma Dabbery version of, I read her book recently, What People Can Do Next, where she talks about from allyship, you know, moving away from allyship more to coalition. And I think allyship is obviously a good thing if it's done in the right way. It needs to be a bit more than reading lots of books about Black history and thinking you've done it. You've got to actually show up and be an ally. So that means speaking up for colleagues. That means being aware and knowing exactly what your Black colleagues are going through, and being able to be an advocate for them if need be. When they're not in the room, you speak up for them. If you hear something said that's wrong, you know, racism, you call it out, you know. So I think that's what it means to me. It's more than just saying I'm an ally and reading loads of stuff. It's got to be about action as well, and working with your Black colleagues and friends and acquaintances, and having people in your life that are different, and then you can say you're an ally. Because I think it's fine being an ally in words, but then not having anyone in your life that is different. That isn't really true allyship. You've got to be able to show that through the people that you know and the company that you keep. Absolutely
agree with you. I think that's spot on. Absolutely. It is interesting how you see people feel like allyship is definitely just reading. And like I say, definitely get to know Black history, because, you know, ignorance is not bliss. Get to know. And again, you know, there's also a part of willful ignorance. So yes, do a little bit of research. But again, it is about action. I'm completely with you on that. And, you know, particularly for our industry, I feel like that's super important. You know, like you said, you know, say what they say about you when you're not in the room, very crucial. You know, speaking up if you see something that's wrong, or you think somebody's being, you know, stepping out of line, speak up and you defend that colleague. And again, it's also about what's happening in your real world. You know, like you said, you know, you might think you're an ally, but you look around and actually all your friends look like you. And then you don't necessarily have an understanding, because even if you've got someone who's from a different, you know, socio-economic background, there's something else to look at in that, because, you know, everyone is affected differently by different layers.
Absolutely.
So, I completely agree with you on that, definitely. So in terms of you and your career journey, because it has been, you know, like you said to me, you've had your twists and turns, which has been really interesting. So what has kept you motivated, or what kind of inspires you to keep you going?
I think it's my friends and acquaintances I see who look like me, who are older than me, who've done great things and who've progressed. They inspire me every day when I work with them and I meet with them and talk to them and share things with them. So my friends and kind of acquaintances I've worked with in the past and present do always inspire me. And seeing other people out there in social media, people out there in the world who are doing great things, Black women in particular, always inspire me. So I think it's about seeing that others can achieve and can overcome all those barriers we've been talking about, because it doesn't mean that, you know, you have to give up. It means that you have to continue and push forward. And I think that I've always been inspired by people who push forward past the adversity and get on with it and progress further and show the others that they are not going to be destroyed and they will move forward and be better. Absolutely.
I think that is almost embodies Black history in itself. You know, the whole pushing forward and trying to, you know, keep it moving despite, you know, being faced with adversity and all types of stuff like that. So give me 1 second. I can hear something buzzing.
Okay.
1 second. I feel like I've got, hold on 1 second. Why is this buzzing? I'll have to edit that bit there because
Yes.
my iPad just started going off. I don't understand what's going on over there. Yes, so we were talking about motivation. Okay. So you answered that question, didn't you? We got to the end of it. Then the bus started going. Okay, fine. Then I will cut from there. Okay. So I'll wrap it up from that. So you said in terms of what motivates you, so you're talking about your family, but friends, other Black women and, Black people who are out there doing great things. I think that's great. And it definitely speaks to kind of our history and, it definitely is inspiring. It also inspires me as well. So I can completely understand that. And you've done some great things yourself as well, which was inspiring. So I want to find out, what did you find most challenging on your journey so far?
Gosh, I think it's been the twists and turns you talked about. I've had a few twists and turns over the years with particularly around the time when there was a bit of I think 2008, 9, 10, 11, there was a bit of a situation where charities were struggling a bit, merging, acquisitions were going on. And I had lots of kind of situations where I got made redundant a couple of times and short-term contracts didn't turn into permanent jobs and those sorts of things. So I've had those kinds of challenges over the last sort of decade or so. But I've come through them, and I think they've made me stronger. I think what you do is you just have to, again, overcome the adversity. Don't allow it to pull you down, move forward onto the next thing, and just keep on striving, keep working. And I have kept on working. I think one of the things I've done with all of those twists and turns is I've continued to focus and to give my best self to whatever I do, however long it's for. And I think that as you get older and wiser, you learn to be stronger, have a thicker skin, and to deal with these things as they come and move forward.
Yeah, be more resilient, don't you? It definitely
absolutely
you, definitely, especially if you're dealing with changes like that. Some of those are outside of your control. So the one thing you can't control that, but you can only control what you do next. So having that attitude is very, very important. And so thank you for sharing that. So in terms of your employer, I think it's always interesting because I feel like there's so many initiatives going on at the moment, trying to bring people of colour in, looking at intersectionality, gender, all types of things going on at the moment. So a key question that I like to ask is, particularly for someone like yourself, because you're on the in-house side of things, what is it that you look for from your employer?
I think I look for a very diverse workplace where possible. I think we all look for that when we're looking for a job, is the diversity in the organisation, not just in terms of race, in every aspect. Yeah. So seeing that at every level of the organisation is really important to me. And if it isn't there, a commitment to achieving it somehow. And I also want to see, a commitment to flexibility for employees, whatever that may look like for each employee. And also a very open culture where you feel you can say what you have to say, and again, not have any fear of retribution if you speak up where you see things are not going well. It's important that we have employers that we can do that with, because we all know the kind of the journey that often we take in the workplace, where you point out what's wrong and then you become the problem. So it's important that employees are able to hear from their Black employees and employees of colour what's not working well, and take that on board and not make the Black person or the person of colour the problem. So I look for that as well, that kind of open culture where you can say what you need to say without any fear of retribution for that.
Absolutely important.
Yeah, and also being very progressive just as an organisation and just looking to be the best they can be in whatever they're doing, and just having that commitment to doing so and bring the whole organisation with them. And that includes, again, commitment to diversity and inclusion of all the people, whoever they are in the organisation, but every protected characteristic that's out there. We need to be sure we're looking at all of those and including all of those in the work and in the employee group that we actually bring together.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. And I suppose for you, what makes a good working environment for you?
Well, I'm working remotely at the moment. Our office is very much for meetings. Now, we haven't got a big office anymore. I work now, so we are all 100% home-based. But even with that, I think what looks good for me is having that, again, open communication channel. So we use Teams a lot to have a lot of conversations, and our kind of water cooler chats moved on to Teams now working remotely. when we do get together, again, it's just having time to think, to work together, to make strategy together, but also to have a good time as well and to have fun where you want to. So I think it's about having a good balance between the hard work and relaxation as well is important in the workplace, and having space to do that is really key. Really? We're working remotely, a lot of us now, so we need to have opportunities to be able to find spaces where we can get together, particularly those member staff who live on their own or who are living in shared accommodation, who haven't got space at work, space at home to work well together, and are missing the office environment. So where we've got those situations, we want to provide spaces for those members of staff to have access to their managers and to their colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely important, very important. I do feel like the post-pandemic world, it's changed, the environment so very much. I do feel like there's no more excuses of, oh, no one can work from home, because obviously it was done. I feel like a lot more workplaces are moving towards a sort of hybrid or remote working environment. And I think that can work depending on, what's happening at home. But again, you do have those pockets of people who actually don't necessarily have the best working home environment and need to have some sort of facilities made available for them.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think you made some really great points there.
Yeah, and I've got a team member who likes to be in the office a couple of days a week. So they go in a couple of days a week and work in the shared office space that we've got. Right. And we have that flexibility now. So for those who don't want to be at home, who get stir crazy at home, can get out and be in the office as well.
I feel like it's just having that balance, like you say, and you've been able to provide that. If you've got working space, you can work from home. Brilliant. And then you've got your team space, you can go and have chats in. I'm assuming it's similar to something like Slack. I've used Slack with people.
It is like that,
so, again, that's really, really helpful. Because that face-to-face contact, is really helpful as well to get the ideas going sometimes. So
absolutely,
it's good that you kind of, weave it in and out where you can. That sounds really good. And you spoke about it a bit earlier, but I always like to ask people, what does diversity look like to you? I feel like I should have included equity in that question too. But, again, I'm leaving it open for you to, say how you feel.
Yeah, I think, as I was saying before, you're right. It's something about seeing every protected characteristic represented around you in the workplace as far as possible and at every level where possible, so that you don't have a concentration of people stuck at the bottom who all look the same or who are the same. And it's also important to have inclusion of everybody who may have particular challenges, whatever they may look like. And I'm not just on about the ones in the Equality Act, I'm also thinking about those things like class as well, that are not part of the Equality Act, that people may feel marginalised as well. So it's about that inclusion and equity for everybody, whatever their background, whatever their situation, whatever group they belong to, feeling that they can belong in that workplace and progress within it, I think is really important. And seeing that modelled by the leadership of that organisation as well is really important. Even if it isn't visible at the leadership, it may be there. Just because people are all white in a leadership team, it doesn't mean that they are all the same, because you've got things like sexuality and disability and things that you can't always see immediately. So I think it's something about recognised diversity takes many forms beyond the visible diversity, and really keeping that in mind when thinking about leadership. And I think as long as the organisation is willing to own the gaps they do have and work to address them, then they're working towards that diverse workplace, and that would look good for me.
No, I get that, and I think that's an interesting point you made about an SMT or sort of senior management at team level. It could be all white, but you don't know what differences that they may have behind the scenes. I always like to think that it's great to see, if you can see it visually, great. But again, there's those that you cannot see, there's the unseen, and you won't always know that. But I think that's an interesting point, because you might have a board that is quite diverse for that particular aspect, but those underneath won't know that unless it's actually shared. And you might not want to share that because it's a personal situation. You might not want to. But with a comms hat on, it's actually an interesting point to share, to show that actually, this is me, this is what I've had. Maybe you're autistic, or maybe you're dyslexic.
Neurodiversity,
you've actually managed to get to managing director level, just like you've got Richard Branson, who's dyslexic and what he's achieved. So Yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, and I've been lucky. I worked in a very diverse SMT, a counsel and care. I've never worked in one since like that. We had myself, we had an Asian woman, we had a gay woman, we had a Jewish man, and then we had an English woman.
Wow.
So
I've
never had such a diverse SMT since then, and that was the most diverse.
And that was in care, wasn't it? I do think that social care is very diverse anyway. You know, that industry is very diverse. And I feel like healthcare is quite diverse as well. It's once you get up into the senior ranks, you find that it's not as diverse. Someone said this to me in an interview the other day, that one of their colleagues referred to the kind of working look, you know, with the white at the top. They referred to it as looking like a pint of Guinness. And I thought that's so true. You know, it's got the white heads at the top and then everybody else below is like, that's right. You know, it's interesting. Very interesting. So moving into your proudest moments, I wanted to get, you know, some of your proudest moments. So can you tell us about some of your proudest moments that you've had? It can be work and personal.
Yeah. We'll kind of maybe combine the two. I mean, like certainly getting my 2 degrees, which I did in later life, working full-time and studying part-time. I got my 2 degrees. I think graduating from nurse was a very proud moment. My mum was there. She's no longer with us now. So having her there was wonderful for both of those. And I felt that she appreciated the work I put into achieving that. I think when I was doing it, she didn't quite understand. But then when I got to the end of it and did the graduation, I think then she understood what it really meant to me to have achieved those. So that's probably my proudest moment in terms of me achieving, and because I was able to change career from doing those things. So that was a very important turning point in my life, was going back to college and studying and working really hard for 7 years in total to get those 2 degrees. So in terms of work, probably my proudest moment would have been, being able to be deputy CEO and then acting CEO at Counsel and Care before they merged, and being able to leave the organisation. It made me realise what my skill set was and what I was good at doing or not so good at doing. But to be given the chance as a Black woman to be able to do that, to be the first, to do that, was really, really a proud moment for me.
Absolutely.
And the team I had there was a great team, and we're still in touch through social media, and we had a reunion a few years ago before pandemic. We had a reunion, and I think that proves that team was a very, very powerful, dedicated team who I don't know if I'll ever have the like again, but they were great.
Oh, amazing. Oh, that's lovely. That's a nice one. And what would you say has been a career highlight for you at the moment? We know that one's definitely one of them. The CEO is definitely a highlight.
I think certainly in the role I'm in now. I mean, I'm the first head of influence at Respect. It's a brand new role, and I'm a Black woman in that brand new role. So I feel very proud to have been offered the opportunity. I've only been in post nearly 3 months now, but I'm delighted to be given a chance to be the first person doing this role and to shape a whole new function. That's very exciting. I've got like a blank page almost to work from, and I'm working really hard to, bring everyone with me to what I want to do. So for me, a career highlight is really where I am now.
Oh, amazing. Well, congratulations to you. That's brilliant. Brilliant.
Thank you.
In terms of your thoughts around the industry, how do you see it evolving within the next few years?
There's lots to do, and I'm trying to be part of that solution. I did the work with Ignite, as you know, a few years ago, and I'm working with a sort of former colleague and friend at the moment to look at what we can do around mentoring of Black people into public affairs and policy work, because we're very aware there's a dearth of talent coming through. It's a little bit, it's there, but we need to, again, get the pathways right so people can get into those spaces and be mentored by the likes of us who've done that work. So I think it's something about doing that work at the early stages so we can get people into the industry in the first place. And when they're in there, helping them to progress so they don't get lost in the lower echelons and get stuck there. So that's I think the future is around the likes of us really doing the work to mentor other people and encourage them into the industry, and when they get there to keep them in it. And I do work with charity comms. I'm a charity comms mentor, so I mentor people in charity comms mentoring program, and that's really important to me as well. So I think it's all about doing the groundwork early on and helping people in their leadership roles to progress and to stay in those roles.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Brilliant. And what advice would you give to young people, particularly of colour, who are considering entering the industry, PR and comms industry?
I would say don't be fazed by seeing a sea of white faces, because often that can be daunting if you go into a room and you are the only one that looks like you. do not be fazed by that, because you have just as much to offer as anybody else, and you have a right to be there. Occupy the space that you're in, because you have a right to be where you are. So I would tell a young person to do that. Don't be fazed. Occupy the space you're in.
I love that. I do love that. Exactly. I think that's brilliant. That's a good advice. So I'm going to move on to mindset, because I think mindset is very, very important. I feel like, particularly when you're on your career journey, understanding that, the majority of our thoughts are negative is very important, so that you can, use your energy to focus on positive thoughts and to try and push those away. So my question for you is, how do you deal with the kind of internal mind war, and how do you manage kind of self-limiting beliefs?
It's really, it's a challenging one. And you're right to bring that up. I think it's something that we don't always talk about, and we don't want to appear weak in that regard. But I think it's important to talk about those things. Yeah. What I do, I try and do the kind of self-talk. I listen to podcasts like Brené Brown. She's always very inspiring. Yeah, so she's very inspiring. Yeah, so I listen to podcasts to get my motivation levels back up again. I read, I watch inspiring YouTube videos. I try and keep myself engaged with what's going on around me, because that will help me to address that negative self-talk. There are some great books out there that have been written. There's a few out there that I can recommend that really give you that kind of coaching in a book that you can actually access. And I think those kinds of things really help you to deal with that negative self-talk. And again, as I was saying before, recognizing that we are working and living in a challenging world, and it's not going to change overnight. But again, recognizing that you are where you are for a reason. No one's where they are for an accident, or by accident rather. We have to recognize that we are in the roles we're in for a very good reason, and not to allow others to push us down, or to make us have those imposter syndrome feelings that some of us do have.
Absolutely.
Just try to stay motivated, I think, is the key. Stay motivated.
Definitely. I agree with you. And so for limiting beliefs, you said that you try and go towards books and, YouTube and things like that. Yeah.
There's some great conversations out there. I mean, Brené Brown's one of those, podcasts that I would recommend again. That sort of, Unlocking Us and Dare to Lead. Those sorts of things are really powerful, because you hear from other people who are very knowledgeable about different things, who share their experiences, good and bad, and you can really learn from that. And also, I think having a mentor and or a coach is really helpful too. I'm in the process of getting a new mentor at the moment. I've had one in the past, but having those sorts of individuals to work with and talk to really helps you, I think, to talk through those experiences you've had in the workplace that week, where you felt put down, you felt undermined, and they can share how they dealt with it, and you can take those things on for yourself and learn from them.
Absolutely. I'll agree with you. I think that's really important. I'm in the process of trying to find a new mentor / coach, but I do have a good network of people that I try and speak to that are in the industry. And only a couple of us, but again, it just means that you do have someone to kind of lean on and just be able to, you're having that moment, and you've got a shared experience, both all of you being, maybe women of colour in comms, and you're able to just kind of share that. So I think that's really, really important. Absolutely agree with you on that. So looking back on your journey now, would you do it all over again? Would you have skipped out M&S and moved to the comms first, or would you change anything, or are you happy with the way it's taking you?
Going right back to the beginning of my life and school, I probably would have taken on board my teacher's advice to do a degree earlier. I didn't. It was again that thing about, in my family at the time, going to university was not really a big option. We were needed at home, to be working. That's the background I come from. We didn't really have a lot of money. We needed to be working to help the family home. So I went to college for a couple of years and then went into working in the clothing industry. But my teacher said, I wish you'd gone to university, because you could have done a really good English degree. And I wish I had done my English degree. I love reading and love books, even to this day. So I wish I'd done that earlier on. And that probably would have taken me into the career I'm in now sooner. But things happening as they did, I'm glad I did change career when I did. The signs were all there. I had the made redundant helped me to do it faster. And it gave me the kind of catalyst to do it quickly and to change direction. I had a really great mentor, again, no longer with us, a woman called Catherine Alexander, who I miss dreadfully, who in my very first temping role at the Department of Health pushed me forward. She helped me and showed me what I could do and said, you'll be a great role model for other people one day, and she was right, and I miss her, and she was wonderful. And so I think that I wouldn't change having met Catherine, because she really helped me to change career and to do it confidently. So yeah,
that's brilliant, isn't it? It's always nice when you've got people like that in your life that are, key pivotal people that you can look back and think, if that didn't happen, I wouldn't have been here. So
yeah,
that's amazing. Much love to her. May she rest in peace. And so, what's the best and worst advice you've been given? Most people are giving me their best advice. No one's really been given worse advice, but you might, change it right now.
The best advice I've been given, and that's just doing comms.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the best advice,
if you want, it could be in
life. I think the best advice I was given at work. Gosh, I'm trying to think of something now. I know I had questions earlier. I should have thought about this question a bit more easily. But I was thinking really about, again, at the very beginning of the journey, when I was given advice by a manager. I had another manager to apply for a role in the Department of Health, a permanent role in the Department of Health. They said, this could be a really good fit for you, and I applied for it and got the job. So I think that was really good advice to go for that, because I was a temp at the time and I could have just gone off somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a good advice I had from that manager. Worst advice, I don't think I've been given anything that's really been, well, it's really hard. I don't really want to name names or anything like that, but I think it's something, probably I would say, advice that would have been something around, as I was saying before, not staying out of your lane. I think there's sometimes you get people who put stuff onto you where they say to you, perhaps this wouldn't be right for you. They're trying to hold you back. So it's not advice as such. It's that kind of being held back a little bit. Example I'm going to give you on that.
It's almost like, because it is holding you back, but it's almost, because the word, you take it as, it's not advice, but it's dropping seeds in there, isn't it? So
So example, I was trying to do a secondment somewhere, and I've been talking to an individual in the organisation I wanted to work at, who was Director of Government Relations. That was their role. And they were saying, maybe you and I could job swap, because I was a policy manager at the time, and they were a bit more senior, but in a small organisation. And I said to my boss at the time, they wanted me job swap with them. And they said, oh no, maybe maybe not that kind of role. Maybe you should go for something a bit more junior, So advice, probably not advice, more kind of a negative steer.
Yeah, definitely negative steer.
That I left that role and became a member of an SMT after that. So, I didn't job swap because they wouldn't allow me to do that job swap. But I did prove that I could go on and do a senior management role after that.
Exactly.
So worst advice, probably more that kind of being held back rather than being given poor advice.
No,
but
I get that. I think it's interesting, because I feel like my best advice has been from my grandmother, which was all about finances. And she'd say, don't put your hat where your hand can't reach. And I stick with that all the time. I think it's a very important one.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
And so, in terms of coming up to the wrapping up of our interview now, so it's been wonderful speaking to you. But I wanted to find out, do you have any rules that you've kind of implemented along your career journey, to help you get to where you are now?
Rules. I think the main rule I have is just always be authentic self. And this is not about bringing your whole self to work, or that's another discussion we had earlier on, but it's about being authentic and being honest with the people around you. Never be two-faced. Always be the same with everybody that you work with. Is important to do that, so that you present a true face of yourself at work. And I think be the best that you can be, play to your strengths and your skills, own your weaknesses. If you are a senior manager, you'll have people around you who are stronger at doing things that they do than you are. So recognize that, own them, and allow your staff to shine. Where your staff have got skills around you, don't dampen those skills, and let them, allow them to shine. Allow them to do the things they do really well, and help them to be the best they can be. Because by doing that, you'll be the best you can be as well. So I think it's something about really helping your colleagues around you to work well. And I think it's a bit about being authentic and helping those around you if you can.
That's brilliant. I think that's nice as well. And particularly because you're in a senior position, it's nice to hear that you want to help your team to shine And I think that's very important. And yeah, very good advice.
Yeah, and give credit where it's due. You know, give kudos where it's due. If it was that person's idea, say it was that person's idea. Don't take the idea for yourself. If it's your team member's idea, pick them up. Make sure they have the recognition.
Definitely agree with that, because that's happened to me a couple of times throughout my career, where people are trying to take things and I'm like, hang on a minute, no, they didn't do that, I did that. Or they try to take credit. It's really bad. I just don't understand it. I'm just like, why wouldn't you just be happy for that person and say, actually, they done really well done, it was a great idea. And you know, I think that's important. And this is the kind of person that it happened to me a couple of times in my career, actually. And in different positions in management, where another manager was trying to take credit for something, and I just thought, come on now, you know, you're a manager. Equally, you shouldn't be wanting to take it off of somebody. So it's really important. But again, I think that comes back down to your own self-esteem and issues that you're bringing to the workplace. Because why else would you behave that way? You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you so much. You have been amazing. It's been great to have you on here. This has been, you know, 9 to 5 Work Rebels, the comms in the Gems in Comms special with Caroline Bernard, who is the head of influence at Respect. And this is a massive role, because it's a new role created for her, like she just said. And she has the full reign to do what you wish. So I think that's amazing, amazing feat. And I've had a pleasure of speaking to you today. Guys, do stay tuned. It has been great speaking to Caroline. I will be back with a new session soon, speak to some more wonderful people from the world of PR and comms. Stay tuned.